Hi, Amos here with FiiO's Q5. Now, before I get started, I'd just like to remind you that these videos are made with the generous support of many individuals who even just send me a couple of bucks a month my way, and those people get to see all my videos in advance, alternate takes, behind the scenes stuff, and early impressions. So if you do consider the equivalent of buying me a coffee once in a while, if you do give me a bit of support, then that allows me to make many of these videos, as well as if you do buy your stuff through the links in the description, that will also help as well. Anyhow, back to the product itself. The Q5, I almost said X5 there. Q5 is a portable wireless and wired DAC amp. So it's much the same kind of thing as we've already been looking at. We've got the xDSD, and we've got the Mojo, which is not wireless, but unless you get a poly. But there's a third in the series of portable DAC amps that I've wanted to review, and of course it's $349. It's $50 cheaper than the xDSD, and but it's no less than fully featured. Now, the interesting thing is it uses the attachable amp modules that you get with the X7 and X7 Mark II. So it's got an AM3A module, which is the latest module on the bottom here, which has balanced and single-ended output. I've also got an AM5, which I've had here for a while. And so there are other models like the AM1 for IEMs and the AM2, which is a kind of medium power module as well. And of course, this allows you to trade off between having power versus battery life. Now, it's kind of more or less, I suppose, a device which if you already have, say, a smartphone or something like that. I've just got my good old iPhone 10, and it comes with an app which has, and FiiO has their own special app for it. Now, just feature-wise, before I get into the app part, it has, it's much like a DAP without the DAP. It's just the amplifier and DAC and amplifier part. So you've got the volume control on the side, power. You have a little indicator here to show if DSD is coming through, which is kind of handy because there's nowhere to indicate, the output frequency unless you have a music app which does so. And you have two USB ports, one for charging on the side and your input on the bottom. And usefully, these two can be switched, which I'll show you about in just a short while. Of course, the reason it has two ports, separate ports, is so that, because if you connect up a port that has charging as well to something like a phone, it's going to go, no, we can't send that amount of current to charge your device and just disconnect you. So it needs the two ports. Of course, on the side, you have playback controls to use over USB, your back, play, and forward. And these double also as input switching and pairing. So basically what happens, well, I'll show you that as well. Now, we want to be the other way around, don't we? You have on top, you have everything in the kitchen sink. It's optical or coaxial using FiiO's kind of reverse pinout digital. And it also has a regular line in, so you can use this as just an amplifier for, say, something like a smartphone, which already has good DAC capability. And you've got your good old line out here if you want just to line out to something else. Useful things, you have low and high gain. This is pre-amplifier module, so it doesn't really affect the amplifier module as such. And you also have a bit of a bass boost, which you've probably seen on some of the amps, like some of the previous amps from FiiO. Now, it has a fancy gold high-res sticker, which we won't even get it to go there. But anyhow, so that's the device itself. Now, as I said, if you connect it up via Bluetooth, you can change some of the features too, which is really cool. So in the FiiO/FiiO app, in the settings, now you can't see anything special there, but what happens if I power it on? When you power it on, it goes into line in mode. You've got various things flashing there. It's got various colors that you can see. It indicates depending on the input that you're using. Now, what you do is you turn it over, and you have, if it's going to focus for me, the Bluetooth thing. So if I press and hold this, you'll see the light turn blue in just a second. Yep, there we go. And it will flash blue and red if it can't connect to anything Bluetooth, which it's doing now. My phone, there we go. Now my phone is very likely connected just now. So there we go. Now, with that all happening, you'll see that on the menu, FiiO Q5 has come up. And handily for this, there you have the indication there. It's just finding its way. You have switch USB port. So with that, you can, I've switched the USB ports, the chargers in the bottom, because it's easier to have data going in. When I set it up, usually I'm sitting at my desk and listening, so switching them around will turn out to be convenient. But some people have phones where, a side connection just makes it easier. It's also a side connection is kind of easier if you want to get it out of the way of the headphone socket, because you might want to rotate it doesn't kind of get in the way. So You need to switch that by just touching the switch USB button. Some other things it has is you can turn on the RGB indicator, will always light up. It always lights up during charging, but you can turn it off if it like using it at night and becomes irritating. Another feature which I'll talk about in a bit is the slow roll-off filter. Now this uses AKM and AKM DAC, and that comes by default with 5 filters. So sharp roll-off, this is a linear phase filter, kind of a minimum phase, and there's stuff that even goes, going by description, which I'll talk about in a bit, even what seems to be non-oversampling filter, going by some of the stuff that someone found online. Anyhow, so there's quite a bit you can switch in there, and of course the channel balance is necessary, as well as the idle power off, which is handy too. So there's apparently at this particular moment the Android version is in beta, and the iOS version is final. So that's handy, and of course the main thing is you can play back music in the app. So you can, I mean, anyone can download. You can look at all the various things that you can do in that app. I won't go into detail, but it makes this good if, you know, for example, if you want a fast DAP, you have to get something like a HiBR6, and you know, you're stuck with having your music on that. But a lot of people already have a smartphone, so to have all the kind of functionality you normally get on something like an X7, but you know, already on your phone, and then just get this is probably more convenient for some people. Although of course you end up having to stack it or use Bluetooth. But as I found, it hasn't been any kind of a loss to do anything like that. So that's pretty much it. And of course, to change them, it comes with some spare screws and a hex key. Now that's where things get a little bit interesting, because you know, changing the modules is easy enough, but the other thing you might want to do is plug it in using various cables. So everyone has like a mini optical to optical. Well, a lot of people do. The problem is this has mini optical input, whereas things like the good old Mojo have a full-sized optical plug. So you know, you have to have a mini to mini if you're going from something like a DAP to this, and good old focus playing up. So if you want to, otherwise, it's probably more useful if you have something like a mini optical to Toslink, and you have like a sound card in your computer which has Toslink output, because that's probably convenient to use if you have a good quality Toslink. Or you might have a coax digital output, and then you can just use the funky adapter which comes in the box, which will work as with the coax input. So that's pretty much your options in terms of input there. But if you want to do DSD, you're pretty much limited to using the USB input for that. Now the interesting thing is, now if you want to connect an iPhone, now we had looked at the xDSD used camera connection kit. So that was this, goes with that there. And they used a funky system, as we saw, where you it has a USB-A plug on the back, and you designed for the camera connection kit, and they used a USB extender cable for the for, you know, connecting to a computer, which is kind of a funky, neat idea, which gives you that flexibility. However, with that, FiiO has come out with got this cable. Now it's a small Lightning to micro USB cable. Now it doesn't work with other devices. It only works with the Q5. I haven't tried it with, you know, an X7 or other things. But now I remember when we looked at the Shozi, one of the Shozi and Kozoi devices in the past, they used a similar cable, and I tried this on those devices and couldn't get it to work with my iPhone 10. And apparently there's some officially, unofficial, or unofficially official, or some sneaky way you can actually get audio out of iDevices and into things without using the camera connection kit, and supposedly save power at the same time. Now, I don't know how that works, so it's a bit of a mystery, but this was an interesting thing. It worked flawlessly with my iPhone 10 and all resolutions and DSD. I used the Onkyo HF player to upsample to DSD 5.6, and it worked absolutely flawlessly. So that's an interesting one in there, and it comes with some other little bits and pieces in the box, such as USB, you know, just a small short USB cable, and some rubber bands, 2 different sizes of rubber bands to connect. So if we get the good old xDSD out of the way, we have a whole bunch of rubber bands, different sizes. So you have slightly smaller and slightly larger, depending what you want to connect it to, which is handy if you've got a spare DAP that you want to use with it. And your good old hex wrench for changing the modules. One of the other cool things it comes with is a piece of rubber. So the idea of this, obviously, is if you want to put something on the bottom of this, you may have seen as I turned it over, it has a nice pad, nice contact pad. Whether you're laying it on a desk or whatever, you put something against it, it's fine. But let's say you want to lay something on top here. Well, they've got this funky contact, kind of slightly sticky, rubbery contact pad. If I put it here, it doesn't slide. And if you want to clamp, say, your DAP or whatever, or phone to this, then you put this in the middle, and it works beautifully for that job. So that's a little clever idea of those. Although they could have just put something on either side. Some people, I think they've left this bare because some people want to put Velcro or some of the other funky, sticky stuff, like that stuff, the 3M stuff that came with this on there to attach to whatever. So they've left a lot of flexibility in there on how it's used. So of course the next thing to do was have a listen and compare them to the xDSD and Mojo. And these are the two things I wanted to compare. As you jump up in price, do you jump up in sound quality? So in that I compared, using Bluetooth. I had the good old iPhone here to compare with, wired mode. Of course the Mojo can only work in wired mode through various connectors. And of course with that I have the good old Andrometers to test hiss, because they're a kind of sonic standard. I have interesting. I'll get that's kind of a chunky wire. The Atlas I reviewed recently. I got these in, and I put these on. I put these on with a funky DETA cable, which has which you've seen in my quick review of, which you can change the plug to balanced and unbalanced. It was good for switching between the balanced output of the FiiO and kind of the unbalanced versions of these. Although I don't have an adapter for the full balanced version of the xDSD. I don't think it made a really significant difference. I also had the good old, and this is not going to fit in frame, the good old Cascades. Now, being that there's a portable solutions, I thought the Cascades would be a good listen as well. I also had things like, if you see my Sundara video, I did the Sundaras, and of course to compare, be absolutely sure how much difference there was between components, I listened with Focal's Utopias. Now, of course, the Utopias are really overkill for $349 device, so that's all right. At least it gave me an idea like how much difference there was between these, and also as you scale up between cheaper gear, cheaper IEMs and cheaper headphones up to more expensive ones, at what point did the FiiO, where did we kind of hit the wall? And that's where things got quite interesting. Now the first thing, as I already talked about, is you can select the filters. So if we go in here, now I wasn't expecting any significant difference between the different filters, but the funny thing is this default is this sharp roller filter. Now the sharp roller filter is, as far as I can tell, and if you just look up on screen, I'll put a diagram there, is a linear phase filter. A linear phase filter, just as a very sharp cutoff, but tends to cause aliasing in the really high frequencies, probably maybe even above hearing range, but it tends to be described by AKM as the most kind of wider sound stage and most dynamic sounding. Some people have said it. Now the thing was, it sounded fatiguing to me and kind of less pleasant, and of course listening with the xDSD was nicer, and of course the Mojo. So what I did is I tried switching to the slow roller filter, and it kind of took the edge off. Now I think the problem is this, and this is something that's been found, this is the reason why Rob Watson and all that does what he does with the Mojo, is that the number of taps with these filters is very small compared to stuff like the Mojo. So whereas a linear phase filter, this is, if you measure something like a Mojo, you'll find more or less a fairly linear phase filter, and you measure the other chord gear, but if you go through the very detailed measurements, you'll see zero aliasing whatsoever. But with the filtering on on these chip DACs, you'll see some aliasing or high frequency distortion up near the Nyquist. So they tend to find a slow roller filter sounds more pleasant. Now there are other kinds of things, the short delay sharp roller filter and slow roller. One or another of these was based on trends designed to eliminate pre-ringing when you sent through impulse responses. And it's kind of like a trend that's kind of been shown to be a bit ridiculous now. But it's too much detail really for going into much. But the net result of going towards these less accurate filters is you kind of get closer to non-oversampling, but you get your sound stage, which can start wide, can start to shrink. And I noticed a jump down in the perceived sound stage as I went down the filters. The super slow roller filter being that everything seemed to be much more narrow. So I thought the slow roller filter was a nice compromise for me. But you can play around with them and maybe you'll notice a difference. I was actually surprised to notice any significant difference at all. I was expecting pretty much nothing, but all the same, it made it less fatiguing. So this is what I stuck with for most of my listening. So with that out of the way, I could have a nice listen to everything. And impressions were with something like even just the Atlas IEMs, that the FiiO sound, the Q5 sounded really nice. And I would probably say, there wasn't a significant jump as you went up. But if you had things like I've been listening with the Chesky binaural recordings, those recordings are, they have a very deep sound stage, and the Mojo still is kind of the king of extracting that deep sound stage. We can hear really deeper into the music, whereas kind of as you go down the range, it sounds a little bit flatter. I also tried like upsampling to DSD. And the Mojo, it's fairly redundant because it already does a very high frequency upsampling anyway. But the DSD input to this sounded really nice, whereas the Q5 it sounded a little bit flatter. And I think it could be the different DACs and the different DSD implementation. But the net result was, even with PCM or DSD, what I think I tried is I listened to the latest Casey Abrams album on Chesky, and I have that in 44 and 192, and I thought, will I be able to hear a difference if I like switch between them? The interesting thing was it was ever so slight, and this is with IEMs, and with the Andromedas, I could very slightly make out a better sense of depth from the 192 out of the xDSD. And of course, this is a really excellent recording, and I don't think it would be noticed on normal music. And with the FiiO, well, it's kind of even less of a difference that was noticeable. And of course, the chord almost nothing. That I probably don't think I'd even pass it. And it was already borderline whether I'd pass that in a kind of blind test or something like that, or an ABX with the xDSD. But it was down to feelings like I feel like the depth of like drum impact was slightly better with the higher res. It was an interesting thing all the same, and of course IEM shut out a lot of ambient noise in the background, but they may not be as detailed as high res headphones. So it's kind of they were kind of borderline, but I wanted to see how far things could go. But it was interesting with the Atlas that it was only the Mojo and the greatest sense of depth and high end recordings that I really noticed jumping up from this. Once with the slow roll off filter, it became pretty much as pleasant to listen with, although we're talking a tiny smidge flatter sounding than these more expensive components. That of course leads to listening with different things. Now of course you have the AM3A module, which was going to work best with the balanced outputs, and of course you can plug in other modules. Now I haven't tested battery life, but my previous experience says that basically what the FiiO has said about battery life and their stuff is generally pretty accurate. So I was going to just have it play through all day, or see for how many hours until the battery ran out. But knowing me, I would completely forget it was going and then come back the next day, it's like, oh, it's gone dead flat, and I don't want to waste the battery life on this. So in that, the main thing I want to know is there are some comments about hiss. So I got up the good old Andromedas, and even with the Atlas, I noticed out of the balanced, there was a little bit of hiss, maybe a touch too much. It was kind of over that threshold where you start to notice it in music, especially high quality music. I think modern music, where there's a lot going on, you might notice it less. But with the good old Casey Abrams, where you can hear a lot of the background, then the hiss became noticeable, and that it was. So I put it just a tiny bit above comfortable threshold on there, whereas things like the xDSD was just below the threshold of being annoying. The same with the Mojo was even lower still. So that's something to note, and that's again a trade-off between having power and flexibility, which you get with the AM3A module, versus some of the other modules where you might get again AM5 more power, AM1 less power and longer battery life, and the AM2 somewhere kind of in the middle, which may not sound quite as dynamic in my experience. But it does sound pretty good and easy to listen with. With full-sized headphones, I want to see how much try the line out to other amps and what have you, and see if I could get out more resolution. Now it was interesting when I had the X7 that trying an external amp versus the built-in modules, there seemed to be nothing in it, and the Q5 is much the same. The X7 Mark II, in the brief time I had it, there was a jump up using an external amp with it, because then the sound to me became improved. But whereas the Q5, I didn't really notice any improvement in trying to use an external amp like the Continental V5 or other devices. The other thing, of course, is the quality of the input of you have with an iPhone, you have AAC, and then we have say my computer or other devices aptX, and with either of those, the quality was really good. There's a tiny, like if you listen to cymbals with aptX versus AAC, the cymbals sound a tiny bit better using aptX, but the good thing was that wired or wireless quality, the sound was really good. And interestingly, if you see a review written by Paul Brooks on headphone and earphone.reviews, then you'll notice that one of the comments Paul made is that the Q5 could be end game device for a lot of people. It's good enough that you can get good enough sound quality out of it that you don't really need higher. And it's one of these things that comes down to need versus desire. definitely certainly a good value device, and it definitely has to be, because nowadays, you know, you can get $350 headphones, you know, wireless noise cancelling, everything in the kitchen sink, and you don't need an external device to plug them into, as everything's inside the headphones. So in that, you know, I think the Q5 is a really nice device from FiiO. It's a little bit behind, you know, the more expensive ones, and you know, if you need flexibility and portability, well, it's flexibility and portability. It's between that and, you know, the xDSD. So we have this nice variety of choices. One of the advantages the FiiO has is the bass boost, and if you saw my Sundara review, the Sundaras have a fairly flat frequency response, and being able to boost the bass with some kind of music made it really pleasant. And this is one of the advantages of the xDSD also has, but it has its 3D mode to make it sound more, you know, spacious and what have you. So between them, you know, it's a choice between which manufacturer you like or which features are more appealing to you. You know, that's what it ends up coming down to. And so, you know, in terms of flexibility and choice, well, it's pretty much, you know, the Q5 has the most. Whereas in terms of sound quality, you know, the Mojo has the top edge, although it doesn't have as many options like wireless, unless you spend basically the Mojo's cost all over again for a poly, which itself has a couple of issues. So through very flexible, portable $350 device, it does really great job. So again, thanks once again for watching. If you do have any questions, comments, or thoughts, please do post them below. If there's something I missed or got wrong, please do check the description and comments for any information about that. And if there's anything I could do better, let me know.